Hi, I'm Pete Chow. You may know me from the RTO Show podcast, but today I'm doing something a little bit different. APRO and Wow Brands have launched a special project to bring the story of our industry to life like never before. They've asked me to sit down with some of the true legends of rent-to-own, capturing their stories, their impact, and their vision for the future. And now I get to share those conversations with you straight from the legends themselves. All of this leads to something groundbreaking though, a new book, The Rent-to-Own Revolution, A Definitive History of Advocacy and Consumer Access, written by APRO CEO Charles Smitherman and Wow Brand CEO Brian Krast. The book explores the grassroots of RTO, the advocacy that has defined it, and the future that we're building together. Here's where you come in. We're giving away free copies once the book is released. Just head over to the RTORevolution.com and sign up for a chance to receive a copy in early 2026. Don't miss the chance to be among the first to hold this piece of RTO history. That's RTORevolution.com. Check it out and become a part of RTO history. Hello and welcome to the RTO Show. I'm your host, Pete Chow, and today we have another legend on. This is Chris Korst, and he has, let me tell you, he's got years when I tell you, of legal experience in the RTO sector, a lot with Rent-A-Center. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't understand how far back these go. We're talking about almost, 40 years ago right now, Chris? Is that what we're talking about?
Yep, exactly.
Chris Korst has done so many things. So you were a chief administrative officer and general counsel, right?
Right.
You were the EVP of operations, so executive vice president of operations.
Correct.
At some point. And you were also the senior vice president and general counsel.
That's correct as well. Huh?
A lot of hats, hats.
Yeah,
and on top of that, I think you got some awards from APRO that we'll talk about very soon.
Yeah, along the way, I was honored and appreciative of that. Yeah.
Well, listen, we appreciate what you've done because I'm starting to feel like what I had here wasn't even near the surface of what we could really talk about. So
right. Yeah.
Let's go back. We're in the Legends series. Let's go back. How does Chris Korst in 1985 get started in rent-to-own?
So that's a great question, Pete. I was in private practice in Kansas City, Missouri, for the first 2 years out of law school. And my folks lived in Wichita, and I was back for a vacation of some sort or another, holiday, whatever. And my dad and I went out to get a beer, and we ran into a fraternity brother of his by the name of Dave Egan, who was at that time the first general counsel of the original Rent-A-Center based in Wichita. And so Dave and I got to talking, and we really hit it off, and he offered me a job as assistant general counsel, I think was my first title, or maybe staff attorney, something like that. And so November of 1985, started on the staff with Dave, and we went from there.
So then what did he say that convinced you that rent-to-own was a place to be? Because in 1985, it wasn't as pronounced as it is now. It was a whole different ballgame. It was a little bit more of a Wild West back then. So 1985, somebody says, I want to introduce you to something that you've probably, I don't know, have you heard of it? But usually back then I get the whole, I wasn't really sure, I never heard of it, but we decided to go with it. Have you heard of rent-to-own before that conversation?
Nope, I had not. Absolutely not.
What was it that he said that pulled you in?
So it's interesting, first of all, cards on the table. I was a young attorney, had an opportunity to move and make a little bit more money, and it sounded like an interesting gig. And Dave was just such a great guy that it was pretty easy to say yes. And so I joined and really just began to learn about rent-to-own. And it was great the way Dave sort of trained me. He put me with the operators so that I would help them write an operations manual. And so just learned about how operations worked, and working side by side with the operators then, was a great experience for me and really helped me kind of understand inside, forget the legal part of it, just how rent-to-own worked and, who used those services and why. And so that was a great experience, learning experience for me.
So starting in the beginning, and from what I understand, there are different things that you've done since 1985, a lot of which could be with rent-to-own and some of it wasn't. You get to take a little bit of a hiatus. I know a few people that have. I know I have too, so I won't hold it against you. But, a lot of things that really kind of sparked my interest is that there was a lot of things going on in the rent-to-own space as far as legal situations back then. There were a lot of states that were just now starting to get into the laws of rent-to-own because there weren't, any precedent before that. And then there were some trials and tribulations that came up in the 90s that were like, oh my gosh, this is going to be really tough on rent-to-own. And I would imagine that you saw all of that at some point. So
I did.
as you start in 1985, where did you go from there?
So first couple of years, I really focused on learning the business and working on the various legal issues that the company was facing, a lot of labor and employment issues, as you might guess, and a lot of growth. So some acquisition work and what have you, really the basics of legal work. But beginning in 1987, Dave asked me if I would help him on a state legislative initiative that was just being put together. Dave, of course, was working closely with the great Ed Wynn, and an attorney whose name you may have heard before, Sam Choate, brilliant attorney and strategist. And so those three were working on trying to craft this master plan for how do we address in a proactive way, the overarching lease versus sale issue, because it was apparent that fighting in the courts and hoping judges understood and really fighting in a lot of bankruptcy courts where equity ruled the day more often than not, it was pretty easy to see that was a losing proposition long term. Really early 1987, four of us talked and at various points separately and then together and put together really a master plan of a state-by-state march, if you want to think about it that way. We had legislation that had been passed by then in Michigan and Texas and Georgia, and New York had just come online as well. And so those are the first four states, and we used a form of those bills as what you might think of as model legislation, and we began to carry it to different state legislatures. We would hire local lobbyists, fly into the Capitol, meet with legislators, organize a state association almost every time, which was critical to the effort, Pete, as you can imagine, because the local people really made the lift when it came to the legislatures in these various states. They wanted to hear from people who lived in those states, who were local merchants and so forth. And time after time after time, the local rent-to-own merchants stepped up, testified before committees, answered questions, organized into state associations, and really were the engine behind what was probably the most remarkable run. And I say this knowing a lot about this, the most remarkable run of state legislative initiatives that I think has ever probably been occurred in this country. Because we went from four state laws at the end of 86 to 45, 1997. And you only do that by collaborating, by pulling oars together and working hard. And the good news is, Pete, we didn't know we couldn't do it, and so we managed to do it anyway.
I think that's always the silver bullet when you tell somebody to do it and they just don't know that it hasn't been done yet. They don't know how difficult it is, and it's like, let's get it done. And then before you know it, I mean, there's an initiative, there's a build behind it. So you said that Michigan, Texas, and Georgia were the first ones, and then you kind of took those bones that fill out and kind of took it to other states. What were the main insights of those bills that got passed that you were able to use those as like the starting points for the other states?
So that's a great question. I think the primary driver for our success, aside from the involvement of the local merchants and so forth, was the fact that we weren't asking for everything to be of a benefit to the merchant. In other words, the legislation that was being proposed was very balanced, very reasonable, genuine consumer protection legislation that also benefited the industry. The trade here all along, and I think I listened to part of Ed Wynn's podcast, and he touched on this. I think the trade here was we need legal certainty and a legal environment that allows us to be able to charge what we need to charge and make a reasonable profit. And in exchange for that, we're willing to disclose everything that the customer might need to understand about the transaction. And then depending upon the jurisdictions, actually get into some additional, price management, price cap sort of approaches to the business. But I think, Pete, the real key was the fact that we were fair and reasonable, and we were promoting true consumer protection legislation.
Was there a difficult time? Because in some cases, there's a lot of people that say, you know what, it seems very close to a credit transaction, and it's not. But you have to kind of spell it out that the lease agreement is different in different ways because of the credit transaction being almost like a permanent situation. This is a mark on your credit. You own this after that situation, versus the lease where you can return it and cancel it out and no longer have responsibility for the product. Was that a hard pitch in what you did? And was it more difficult in some states than others?
Certainly, the answer to your latter question is no doubt about it. We had, and frankly, never did successfully convince the legislatures in Minnesota and New Jersey and Wisconsin that this really wasn't a different animal and should have a different regulatory framework than credit. And so those states are what they are today. But yeah, there was, in the late '80s, there was a lot of challenges, both in the courts as well as through the legislative process, over how to best regulate this transaction and how to best characterize it. And that occurred both at state levels, but also you and the listeners may recall, may be aware that in the late '80s into the early '90s, there was a federal effort to amend the Truth in Lending Act to include rent-to-own as a credit sale under that federal law. And so, we were fighting on all fronts, and we lost a few. Frankly, I mean, we lost Pennsylvania in 1988. It was a little bit of a sleight of hand by the chairman of the House Consumer Protection Committee, but nonetheless, we were put out of the rent-to-own business in a matter of days, and it was 8 years later before we were able to turn that around, 1996. So yeah, there were a number of places where the narrative that we were providing was not sufficiently convincing to get legislatures to enact, some form of model legislation. Now, I'll tell you where things really began to turn. Came about in 1989. We had actually come in contact with a state legislative organization called the Council of State Governments. And every other year, they put out what is known as suggested state legislation. And it's a manual that state legislatures use across the country. I don't know if it's still in use, but it certainly was very popular at that time. And we managed to get our Virginia bill in that 1989 suggested state legislation manual, and when you think about the impact of that, so the next year, 1990, we're knocking on doors saying, "Yeah, here, use this one, use this one. Don't take our word for it. Take the Council of State Governments." Right.
So you say there's 4 states that were in '86, '97. There's 45.
I think that's right.
You're talking, and even if we're even close, you're talking 41 different states in a matter of maybe 10 or 11 years. Was there a hotspot set of years where it was like, man, this is, we have maybe the right presidency, maybe there's enough people in either seats of the House or the Senate that like the bill as far as the states are concerned? Was it easier in the South and the North? Like, was there like a domino effect and it was just like, hey, we were really knocking on all cylinders? Or was it because as you went on, you guys were able to kind of fine tune and hold your blade and say, hey, I know this works. I know that talking about this really helps. I know that getting this into the Council of State Governments is probably a great idea. Was it slower at first and then more at the end, or how did it work?
So we did pick up a lot of momentum coming out of the 1989 legislative season. And really from 90 through 95 or so, we were, 94 maybe, we were literally actively engaged in 5 to 6 states at any given time. And we're very successful in accomplishing our goals of getting favorable legislation passed. Now we had some issues. We were constantly. I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, for months at a time during those years. Spent a lot of time with Ron DeMoss and Roger Sharp up in West Virginia in Charleston, and we were very unsuccessful for a long period of time up there as well. But on the other side of the coin, I mean, it just got rolling where, and believe it or not, part of my compensation at that time was based upon how successful we were through the state legislative process. And the goals kept getting higher and higher and higher in terms of being able to earn a bonus. Is like, I mean, do you think this is easy? Because we made it look easy, but it was not.
Chris, you're too good at this. We're going to have to make it a little bit harder for you next year. And I'm going to say, I mean, it looks like you knocked it out of the park. Now, being associated with Rent-A-Center this time and going through this, how was the collaboration between APRO and Rent-A-Center? You mentioned Ed Whitten was the legal counsel for APRO for 40 years before he retired earlier this year. Like, how deep was that collaboration with APRO to make these things happen?
Well, I would say we couldn't have done it without APRO and its sanction of the effort, number one. And because Ed had such a credible voice, and I think still does in the industry, that his support for what we were trying to accomplish was really integral and critical to our being able to go around the country and talk to rental dealers in Arkansas and Minnesota and Colorado and Arizona and all the other places where we ended up going. We had the imprimatur of Edwin and APRO that really allowed us to be taken seriously and credibly by the state rental dealers. So that was a part of it, but it wasn't always easy either, because there was a lot of mistrust in some places over, the big guys coming in. And does it benefit everybody, or does it really just benefit Rent-A-Center and all the stuff that you would expect? Absolutely no surprises, but we had to deal with those questions, and I think in retrospect we were able to do so, successfully. But yeah, no, it was not always smooth. Even at the APRO level, the board meetings and the government relations committee meetings were oftentimes contentious. A lot of back and forth over budgets, over money, over how we were going to raise enough to do the things that we needed to do. But through it all, I will say this: through it all, collectively, we kept our eyes on the prize. We knew what had happened to our colleagues in Minnesota and Wisconsin when we got put out of business there. We had seen the big checks being written primarily by Rent-A-Center for class action settlements and what have you. And people took that seriously. And so we were able to put aside whatever differences we had and work toward collaboratively toward that goal.
Well, I can tell you right now, it looks like you almost had a state a quarter over the essence of a 10 or 11 year span. That's a movement. That's some serious movement. Now, I know that in the early 2000s, there was probably, let me rephrase that. We're probably talking even mid to early 90s, not just Rent-A-Center, but rent-to-own as a total. We had a black eye. There were some bad operators out there that did some stuff that made us a little difficult. They collected they collected in a way that might not have been the right way they should have collected, or there were some situations out there that kind of made us look bad. And that moniker kind of followed us for a few years. And I think, and I call it the dark ages. I think we came out of the dark ages in the early 2000s when it really came out. Rent-A-Center became bigger at that point in time because, Thorne and the acquisition and all that stuff with, Renter's Choice. But going into the early 90s, mid 90s, and then late 90s, how difficult did that become if there's some guys out there, some bad apples that are acting a certain way under collections and sales practices, while you're out there trying to make these RDAs go to their legislative branches and say, hey, we need a law for this because we want to do this the right way. We really want to be on the up and up. We want to make sure that you see how much money you're spending. We want you not to get locked into this. It's not a credit transaction, and we want you to be able to own this. Was there a dichotomy there? Like, on one hand, you're trying to do the best you can. On the other hand, you really got to figure out how to get the news to people that we aren't what they think we are.
Sure. And you put your finger on it, helping people understand that one way to address those outliers is through, consumer protection legislation that gives consumers rights and doesn't allow merchants to do whatever the heck they want. I want to quickly add, because the years have given me a good deal of retrospection, Pete, but I would say It wasn't just the local mom and pops who were misbehaving, and it wasn't a lot either, by the way. You didn't need much because it made headlines, but there wasn't a lot, and it wasn't just mom and pops. I mean, I recall some issues that Rent-A-Center had in some of its operations as well. And then the other thing is the stories are easy to over dramatize and to fictionalize. And we know that, for example, when in September of 92, the Wall Street Journal ran a front page article on Rent-A-Center and had just horrendous misallegations, wrong statements, and so forth about the company and our business practices and so forth. But this was back when the Wall Street Journal was still one section, and it was the oversized paper, and we had the right-hand column on a Friday, and then you open up to the fold in the middle, and it was both sides of the fold. That's how much coverage this got, and that made things difficult for a while, certainly, in a couple of respects. One, speaking to policymakers and what have you, and two, I think some of my fellow rental merchants were a bit uncomfortable, having to answer questions about what was in the Wall Street Journal and what Rent-A-Center was doing. So it really got in the way, but only for a little while, because again, this industry has always kept its eyes up and its march forward, whether that be through the legislative process or today in terms of how focused the folks are on serving the customer the right way, offering quality products, respectful collections, all those kinds of things. Those are all hallmarks of what I've always experienced with the rent-own industry, and that is they care, and then they know what's right, and they're going to do that as often as they possibly can.
Well, you sound like you played a big part in the advocacy for rent to own, and I got to know. So, what role did you play in Rent-A-Center, and helping the industry as a whole moving towards best practices? Was there an outline that you guys kind of worked on?
Well, I don't know if there was an outline per se. We did really, and this really was a function of what we were trying to tell the state legislatures about us. That created again a narrative around the right way to do this business, and so that became our mantra as we went through these processes. Of course, APRO had its own operation standards, et cetera, and that has been around really from the very early days of APRO, is set the standard, set the bar high for how you should, take care of your customers and what have you. And but more specifically, Pete, I would tell you my role in the advancement of the legislative agenda was really central. I was the guy on the road 40 to 45 weeks of the year. I got to about 42 state capitals and testified in hundreds of legislative committees, attended far too many fundraisers and all that sort of stuff. But and by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't add right now, there have been so many people who've helped me along the way. Most importantly, my wife, Claire, because we had 3 little ones at home and I was gone 45 weeks of the year. And you can't do that with just a superstar at home, and that's what
absolutely. We need to get her on here so that you can tell her side of the story. So, going back a little bit, you had mentioned that there was also some. I think we both had mentioned it, but there was some federal attention and some threats that came up during your time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe that to me a little bit and what they were?
Yeah. So, and the first real critical threat came in 1993, I think it was. Henry B. Gonzalez from San Antonio was chairman of the House Banking Committee, and he introduced legislation, an amendment in the form of legislation that would have pulled rent-to-own terminable leases in under the definition of credit sale for purposes of truth in lending, which would have been, obviously devastating to what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it'd have been terrible. That would have killed us.
But again, in a tribute to the moxie and capabilities of this industry, we immediately rallied. Hearings in the relevant subcommittees were scheduled. We had members come up to Washington, testify, meet with the press, do all those kinds of things. And I got to tell you, we were so effective that Henry Gonzalez was chairman of the full banking committee. He introduced legislation that got sent to a subcommittee, and it never left the subcommittee. And this is the chairman's bill, and it never moved. It never
moved.
That is
a move for rent to own. Let me tell you, you guys were seriously effective. Talking about APRO and Rent-A-Center, because you were part of Rent-A-Center at that time, and how effective you guys were, the team of Edwin, yourself, and some others. I also believe that there was some creating of the RDAs at that time, the rental dealer associations across the U.S. Did they play a role in their states as well, or was it like we showed up, we formed it, and then we helped them go with us to the Capitol? And was it like all in one swoop, or was it, some people had seen, wow, they're really effective in what they're doing for their state, we better get online with APRO, kind of create this RDA and kind of put in some groundwork before they have to get here?
Mostly the former. Once we identified a target state, Pete, we would reach out through APRO and independently to rental dealers in Mississippi or Kansas or the Dakotas or wherever else, right? And we'd introduce ourselves and tell people, here's what we would like to do, and let's hold an organizational meeting and send out invitations. APRO was really the driver of that process of mailing invitations, notifying rental dealers, and so forth. And then typically Ron Waters and I would travel to whatever state it was and hold an organizational meeting. And Ron was terrific with the rental dealers. So easy to get along with, so credible and so forth, that it really became sort of a cookie cutter approach to how to get this thing going. Now, to your point, and you're right, somewhere along the line, that model changed a little bit, and some rental dealers began to think, well, maybe we ought to get organized, because then maybe those planners will put our state on the list to get moving here, because we want to go now, not wait for years or whatever.
Right.
So there was some of that, toward the later years. But yeah, it was really mostly front loaded. Let's get everybody together, tell them what we want to do, ask for their support, try to raise some money, and then head up to the Capitol.
So after, 93 had Henry B. Gonzalez, was there anything else that kind of came up that really was like, what, this is something we better put our attention to before it gets to a point where we're already behind the eight ball?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 97, and I'm going to give generalities here because I was involved from a advocacy perspective, but not necessarily from the substantive perspective. But there was a critical tax issue addressing depreciation in our industry. And of course, the notion of credit sale versus lease or terminable rental agreement is a critical one for tax purposes as well, because if you're a merchant, you're selling goods, you got to write that product off when you sell it. On the other hand, in our business, we know that we depreciate those assets over the course of the rental agreement, over the course of the 18 months, 2 years, or whatever it is. And the proposal on the table would have had rent-to-own transactions included as credit sales for purposes of writing off the asset upon the transaction's commencement date. So we rallied. We got the right people with the right voices and the right information. We got up to Washington, and in fact, we're able to obtain legislation amendments to the tax code that secured and clearly locked us into, this is not a sale, and the asset should be depreciated, and here's a methodology by which you should do that.
So as you're doing this, because you're championing, got to say this word right. You guys are killing it. You're going from state to state. You're making this happen, whether it's for Rent-A-Center, whether it's for APRO, whether it's with the RDAs or without. You're knocking these out, right? On average, we've said once a quarter, you got another state checked off and moved on. But, you said a couple things. We've got to make sure that we're letting everybody know this is the cost of ownership. This is what you're going to get into. This is what you can expect. These are the things that we've outlined so this is what you can get from us, because this is what we want to get from you, right? So you want to get it from us. We're going to put it all out there. You're going to know everything you're getting into. You're going to know how long you're going to be paying for it, what you're going to be paying for, if it's used, if it's not used, brand new, whatever the case is. But at that point in time, then some of this was new. Some of this was in each area. This is new to us. We're going to figure all this out. Was there also an effort to make sure that there was these checks and balances, that somebody was going back behind you and going, okay, we said that we're going to do this, but we have to make sure and ensure that we're doing this. And somebody had to go through with these audit processes and making sure that it was happening. Was that also something that you were a part of? Is that something that you helped create?
No, not really. In a handful of states, the way the regulatory framework sets up, Pete, there are administrators responsible for doing that audit and confirming compliance and so forth, and correcting course or fining or doing whatever else the case may be. In almost all the legislation that was passed, there was some state agency designated as the responsible party for enforcement. After these state laws were put into place, but before they became effective, we would routinely have a compliance seminar and invite all the rental dealers to attend. And either I or, Ed Wynn did several of these as well. Others who came after me on the Rent-A-Center legal staff, the Ron DeMosses and Brad Dennisons and so forth of the world would go to the state after the law was passed but not yet effective and say, all right, here's how you comply. And here's a form rental agreement that you can use, or you can go have your own created, whatever the case may be. But yeah, we would coach people on how to comply with the new legislation.
So that's something that this is actually the first time I've heard is. So we actually helped create the rental agreements that we adhered to.
We did.
In some cases. Oh, that's awesome. That's great, because so then in 2011, the CFPB comes, something that's a little bit different than we had before. That CFPB is now on the scene. How did that change things?
Well, in the end, it really didn't change much of anything, at least not until more recently, where the CFPB had a couple of years or so ago tried to grab the new virtual leasing transaction and pull it under its authority. But Pete, in 2009, coming out of the financial crisis, the Sarbanes-Oxley bill was being prepared. No, that's not right. It was the later one. It was the anyway. The new regulatory framework that created the CFPB, until we were able to get it amended, might well have put regulatory jurisdiction over rent to own under the CFPB. We were able to get an amendment in committee that excluded short-term leases under which the initial term was less than 90 days, not under the CFPB's jurisdiction, but rather under the FTC's, where we had been for years. And so we were able to escape that, that situation pretty cleanly. Again, working the committee in the House and eventually getting that amendment secured.
I think, when you talk about the FTC versus the CFPB, I have heard so many things about not wanting to be under the CFPB and how well we could do without that situation, considering we've been running very well without it. I think that would be a huge overstep in the wrong direction. And I think it could really hurt a lot of rental dealers across the United States, because honestly, it was never built that way. And I think that if something that's not built the way it is governed will definitely eventually fail, because they're going to have a lot of overreach, and then it's going to cause a lot of leasing agreements to be seen in a lot of different ways. And I think they're battling a little bit of that up in New York. I don't know how much you know about that right now, but they're trying to deal with some legislation up there to not put us in some different light. They've been governed really, I guess, since you guys got New York changed over with some federal laws, have been working very, very well. I mean, there's a lot of rent-to-own companies in that state, and owners in that state, and employees in that state are doing very well. So they're trying to, APRO is working actively now to keep it exactly the way it is without change, because you guys laid some very, very good groundwork on that. And then, so as you're going through this, you have to put the transparency up. You have to let them know, hey, this is the numbers that you're going to deal with. This is how you do it. This is how you regulate. Now I'm starting to find out, we also had the rental agreements that you put out in front. I mean, is all these initiatives that were put out and all these things, how do you feel like Chris Korst was perceived throughout time? Did you feel like you've accomplished a lot and what you meant to do during those times? Because I would say you've accomplished way more than I think, that was able. But not only did you that, but do you feel like you've left that legacy? Like you've been able to say, you know what, I've really left my mark on rent to own? Or is there something else that you feel like was coming down the pipe that you wanted to tackle before you left?
Well, my answer to your first question would be yes. I think the industry does have an understanding and I hope an appreciation for what role I played in a team effort, right? Because it really was a team effort. Along the way, I will tell you, I was probably accurately perceived as a bit of a bully because
Really?
a lot of rent-own dealers, were worried, understandably, about, well, wait a minute, if I tell the customer what the total is, they're going to run out the door. And all these other disclosures, and oh my goodness, and over time, obviously, that those concerns evaporated because they turned out to not be true. But in order to get what we got accomplished in the amount of time we got it done, sometimes there was some pushing going on. Yeah, I was doing some of it, and so I understand. Particularly the benefit of the years that have passed. I understand that there was some, resentment to, well, here comes Rent-A-Center, here comes Korst, we're getting, they're going to tell us what to do and all this kind of stuff. I appreciate that, but I also hope in retrospect for other people, they look back and go, well, I'm glad somebody did, because this could have turned out very, very differently had we not been as aggressive as we were.
Well, I'm telling you, just so that we can say a state a quarter. I'm going back over that. Like, that is some serious accomplishment, which led you to the APRO President's Award that you won. That's awesome. How was it winning an award with that?
Well, it was great. Obviously, you like anyone, I gave a lot of my professional time and a lot of personal sweat and tears and so forth, trying to be successful on behalf of a group of folks who, in turn expressed their gratitude for that. And that was the President's Award. And, I'm just really proud. I'm just really proud of what we were able to do together. In no ways do I want to leave an impression that it was me. It was us. It was when I got to a certain point, Ron DeMoss stepped in and helped out in California and West Virginia and other states like that. And he was awesome. And subsequent to all of that, Brad at Dennison and Dwight Dumler were there. Matt Grinwald later in the later years, after we moved down here to Dallas. We couldn't have done it without Ron Waters, who was just spectacular, and Bill Keese was so supportive as well. That so yeah, that to have had the honor bestowed, the President's Award bestowed, was really meaningful. And then later, of course, I got the Lifetime Achievement Award after I thought people had forgotten about me.
No. I mean, you were part of a really big situation. I mean, without some of the things that you participated in, I don't think I would have had the career that because my career started in 2000, and I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today if it wasn't for the work that you guys put in.
Okay,
and I got to say, like, what out of all this, because you've got a big resume there. What was some of your biggest challenges going through and getting some of these states done? Do you remember one or two that were like, wow, this was a challenge, this was difficult, this was something that I can write on my wall here?
Oh yeah. West Virginia was extremely difficult. And took really, I think my first trip to West Virginia, I was actually in Washington with Dave Egan, and we were interviewing for lobbyists, and we had dinner with John Raffaelli. I don't know if that's a name you know.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
John's a wonderful guy, great guy. I just talked to him last week again. And we were looking to hire John, and Dave got a call from, I think it was Roger Sharp, who was one of the few rental dealers in West Virginia at the time. And he said, hey, we got a problem. There's been a bad bill introduced. And so I literally flew from Washington to Charleston the next day, and I was there for a week. And that was 1988. And it took us 5 years to get across the finish line there. So yeah, West Virginia was extremely difficult. Pennsylvania, same thing. I mean, and we were really out of business in Pennsylvania for all intents and purposes. We tried some different, transactions where customers could get, award points or what have you. And it just really never took. But it was 8 years. And as I said earlier, I was in Harrisburg every year for weeks on end, sometimes during the legislative sessions. So those two really stand out. New Jersey, of course, we never did get there. And frankly, I don't think we ever got close. Now, Minnesota and Wisconsin,
right?
What's that?
That was a tough nut to crack, huh?
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
It was very difficult. And that's too bad too, because there's a lot of consumers who need the rent-own option in that state. And the environment has been discouraging to, competition, which is not good for anybody, I think. And then the other two that really stand out are Wisconsin and Minnesota. I think we could have at the very end of the days in Wisconsin gotten across the finish line, but ultimately did not. And Minnesota, it's a different story for another day. But we got lied to by some of the players in the process up there about what they were planning to do, and we ended up with a piece of legislation that ultimately a federal district court judge ruled as a part of the credit laws, which it was never intended to be. And so that's where we ended up in so
that's rough. That's
yeah,
rough.
well, uh-huh.
If you were to take a look at it right now, what's going on? There are different things. There's buy now, buy now, pay later. There's a couple other things. What are your thoughts on these alternative financing models and how they can affect, a lot of the people out there versus the way rent to own was built and our regulatory? Because you went and fought to make sure that not only do we have the ability to do it, but to be overseen very well. We have to stay within certain laws. We have to disclose everything that we do. But now you have some of these other financial models coming up, ACMA, Progressive, buy now, pay later. What do you think about those models in comparison to all the things that you fought for these past couple of decades?
So, from a consumer and market perspective, Pete, I mean, these evolutions are inevitable. People need access. And as long as credit is going to be based upon what you've done in the past and not what you can or want to try to do today, then credit's not going to be a good fit for 2/3 of America on a regular basis. And so that 2/3 needed some options, and we were one of the first in line, right? We weren't the first in line. There were far worse options before we came along, as you know,
That's
right?
true. That's true.
But when we came along and really legitimized, an alternative transaction to consumer credit, it was a matter of time before a couple of things would occur. One, that transaction itself would be picked up and employed by merchants to try to access a broader group of consumers, a different group of consumers. And heck, I think it's fair to say that Rent-A-Center was probably the first in that game, because we were partnering with Ashley's retail stores, taking their turn downs and doing rent-own transactions back as early as, I want to say, 2008. And I remember that because the first place we tried that was in Atlanta, and I had just become EVP of operations, and I went down to Atlanta with Mitch Fidel, and the Rent-A-Center closest to the Ashley store was where all the returns were ending up. And we walked into this Rent-A-Center store, and I mean, it had, I don't know, 700 units in inventory from all the pickup. You walk into the big showroom, you walk in, it's chock full of Ashley bedroom furniture, living room furniture, no other brands, very few TVs, very few washers and dryers. Then we walked out back, and I'll never forget, there were like 4 of these trailers full of the returns. And so, and that was early 1988 I'm sorry, 2008. And what that told me though was, there's a demand that needs to be met. How do you do it? And over the course of the years, of course, Rent-A-Center's figured that out, but so have, some other people, some other players, notably Progressive and ACMA, but others as well. And so what I worried about, if I were in that industry even today, I would continue to worry about, is the potential negative effect that those applications of the rent-own transaction to these other opportunities might have on policymakers, because it's a different animal, and it's the same form being used in a different way. And what I would say to your audience, because I think they'll really appreciate this, is one of the ways that we were able to be as successful as we were through the state and federal legislative processes is that the right to terminate and return the products at any time and then come back in and pick up where you left off was a critical, maybe the paramount factor in convincing people that this was different, right? And I'm afraid that that's maybe not true in all of the other applications that the transaction is being used for today.
Well, 100% agreed. I actually believe that's why New York is in the place that it is now, because these new actors that are in there and taking, the progressives, the ASEMA, they're getting more steam. A lot of people are seeing it, but that deciding factor. The other thing too is, we still brick and mortar. There's a place to return it to. It's not just a line on a statement sheet. It's you really can return it if you have that much trouble. And when you return it, you don't have to be sent to collections. You're no longer in the doghouse. We can go a clean slate, and then you can come back later and pick up where you left off. That's even the best part of it.
A beautiful story. It really is a beautiful story.
It is. But when you have these other situations where they're saying you can make these payments, but in the sense that you can't return it and you're probably going to be liable for it regardless of what happens to it, then that imposes the collection side of it. It puts us in a credit standard, and it's like, wait a minute, we're not there. And I think that's what they're really trying to differentiate and identify down to the wire of what's going on in New York. I got to say though, with all this, all that you have accomplished, being a vice president in 3 different situations, you have the awards, you've done a lot with APRO, the Ed Wynn and every other name that I could mention in the book, including Mitch Fidel. What are you doing post Rent-A-Center? What's going on now in your life?
So, great question. So I was with Rent-A-Center in Wichita until 98, Pete. When I left, I had actually spent the last 2 years during that stint heading up a new business that Rent-A-Center wanted to get into, the used car sales and finance business, buy here, pay here. And so when I left Rent-A-Center in 98, I actually bought that asset from Renter's Choice after the sale and started my own buy here, pay here used car lot in Wichita and ran that for 3 years. And then I got a call, as I think I mentioned, from Mitch in February of 2001. And he asked me if I'd be interested in coming back and being general counsel. And I talked to Claire about it. And I talked to my partners in the car business about it. And we ended up coming on down. And so we moved here in 2001. As you said earlier, I was general counsel till the end of 2007. And then from 2008 to the end of 2013, I was EVP of Ops. Which was an absolute blast, by the way. I had so much fun in that job. And then in 2014, I moved back into the home office role as chief administrative officer and general counsel, and did that till I left in June of 2019. Since that time, I've been mostly general counsels for 2 different restaurant and real estate family offices. So the first of those is now the 2nd largest franchise company in the country. And the one I just left last Friday when I retired from full-time practice was, I think, the 5th or 6th largest, with all kinds of brands that everybody would recognize and so forth. So I retired on Friday from full-time practice, but I'm now a partner with Outside General Counsel, which is a firm that provides fractional general counsel and legal help to small businesses, big businesses, whoever has a need. Maybe you're a startup and you don't want to hire a general counsel, or you can't afford one. You call me, and I provide those general counsel services for hourly rates and what have you. And so I'm anxious to get that started, and I'm going to put a commercial out here, Pete.
All right.
Any of my friends and colleagues in the rental business need any help, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you, and if for no other reason, just catch up.
Well, I tell you what, and so what state are you living in now?
So we're still in Frisco, Texas, suburb of Dallas. And we've been here, as I said, since the summer of 2001. Yeah, we love Texas, love the Dallas area, a lot to do around here. And by the way, it's a great place to travel from. You're anywhere in one flight. And
right.
Yeah, it's perfect. When I was out gallivanting around the country on my 2nd stint with Rent-A-Center, I was just so thankful I was not back in Wichita, where there's always a connection.
So you said it's an area of Dallas. It's like a sub area of Dallas.
That's a suburb, yeah. So if you think about Dallas, north of Dallas, the next large suburb is Plano, and then Frisco is just immediately north of Plano.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So you're close to. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now. the things that you've done in rent to own, I'm gonna have to buy you lunch or sometime if I'm ever in the area.
I'd love that.
Dallas all the freaking time.
I'd love that. That'd be awesome.
It's a great place. I love that place. So, you've done so much. It's really kind of hard to say one or two things. I mean, you've had this established career that's amazing throughout years. If you had to say in some final thoughts, Chris, you've done a lot. Going into the future, you've kind of stepped away. Now you're doing your own thing aside from rent to own. But as rent to own goes on, and there are these new things that should be popping up, including some of the things that are happening in New York, what would be some advice that you would give to the members of APRO, that you would give to the members of the RDAs, that, going into the future and as they come across these speed bumps, these hurdles, what would you say to them?
So, Pete, I think what I would say is really more in the form of a reminder of what got us here. And what got us here, first and foremost, was collaboration, working together, speaking with one voice. Second issue, the second reminder that I would give is, the high level of customer care, not just customer service, but truly, I've watched the folks in this business for decades, and it is customer care. That needs to be the forefront of the story. And then, reminding the legislators, the policymakers that, under these regulatory frameworks, customers are fully protected and they get what they want and they get what they need and their rights are fully insured. So, stay with that playbook, stay with that story. And by the way, don't hesitate. Find some of your best customers and get them to go up and talk to the legislators themselves. We had a good deal of success with that over the years, and because the customers would put it in their own words.
Yes.
More generally speaking, Pete, I would try to think strategically about, how do you create regulatory frameworks that have, the right amount of variability depending upon how you're going to apply the transaction. Because, by the way, not only do I not begrudge anybody but for using the transaction, I'm proud that we were able to legitimize it the way we did, right?
Absolutely.
But that being said, the big players in that space should be every bit as protective of the right to do this transaction as we have been over the years. Period.
Agreed.
They have an obligation at least as much, if not more so, than the traditional rent-to-own dealer, right?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to tell you, Chris, I appreciate you being on. Good luck in all the endeavors that you've gotten yourself through and now into. It sounds like you're doing amazing outside of Rent-A-Center. Listen, I will tell you guys, if you guys have any questions, please hit me up at the show. It's Pete at the RTO Podcast.com. You can send me anything. If you have any questions for Chris Korst, I will definitely send it his way because he's got a lot of legal tenureship. He's got a lot of knowledge and probably things that you want to know about. Also, remember, this is part of the Legends series. We are going to put some of this information out on the book that's actually coming out. You don't want to miss that. But if you have any questions and you want to hit me up, you can hit me up at the show also. You can do it on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can also do it on YouTube where you're going to see this. Chris, it's been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. And I will tell you guys, as always, get your collections low to get your sales high. Have a great one.
Hey everyone, it's Pete Chow here from the RTO Show podcast, and I want to tell you about a company that's making a real difference in the rent-to-own space, Wow Brands. I've seen firsthand how they approach marketing, and let me tell you, it's not just about ads. Wow Brands builds complete digital ecosystems designed specifically for the rent-to-own industry. Their e-commerce and lead generation strategies are built to bring in qualified leads. And did I mention that they are actively working with the rent-to-own industry while also being members of APRO and TRIB? Listen, these folks are passionate problem solvers. They don't just slap something together. They design, build, and scale the kind of digital retail tools your business needs and your customers actually want. So if you're serious about growing, reach out to Wow Brands at wowbrands.com. I trust them, and I think you will too.